All right. So the court case in question, or the event in question that we're going to go over basically today and tomorrow, relies around, or is centered around, this thing called the Scopes monkey trial. Okay, this trial takes place, or this event takes place around July of 1925, so in the mid 1920s. And like I said, this court case is super important in basically the way in which you are taught in public schools, and even comes down to, how, what's the best way to put this? It even comes down to basically how there is a separation of what can be taught and what can't be taught in public schools. Okay, all because of this Scopes monkey trial. I promise it isn't about primates brushing their teeth. It's got a little bit something different, but nobody thinks I'm funny today. That's fine. Okay, it's whatever. It's fine. Get away with it for today. All right, so. All right, a little bit of background information about the Scopes monkey trial, or some important things that you need to know about the United States during this time, okay? So if we look back on the history of the United States, every once in a while, the United States goes through these waves of religion, or like religious awakenings or movements, whatever you want to call it, that's often associated with questioning power, authority, and the elite, okay? We have a bunch of these different waves, and we have a bunch of these different movements, awakenings, whatever you want to call it, throughout American history and throughout just like world history in general, okay? There are a couple different awakenings that happen specifically in the United States. We have the First Great Awakening that happens in the 1740s and 50s, basically during the time of the Puritan Pilgrims, as they are creating a new nation before the actual creation of the United States of America. In that Great Awakening, or in that religious movement, it helped fuel the fire against England in the fight for revolution. So basically, these Puritans who had settled on this newfound land had said, hey, we are looking for no persecution based on our religion. We're looking for our own government, or our own independence, and we can fuel it with or we can follow the rules in which we've set up based on this religion. It all has to do with that Great Awakening, okay? And to have all of that, we have to be by ourselves, which means revolution, which means independence. Happy birthday, America, okay? The Second Great Awakening, or we go through another one about 100 years later, in the early 1820s, or the early 1800s into the mid 1800s, called the Second Great Awakening. I know they're very good at naming things. It's almost like it's the second one, so it's the Second Great Awakening. Yeah.
Why did they call the First Great Awakening before 1820?
Religion. No, I'm just kidding. They did actually call it the Great Awakening, and then we get another one, so then we change it to the first and the second. Yeah. So the Second Great Awakening happens in that early 1800s era, and this helped launch a bunch of new political movements. In the early 1800s, especially basically up to 1820s, we had a lot of political turmoil going on in the United States, a lot of changes to political parties, and a lot of changes to the geographic representation of the United States. So one of the things that stood out was basically your exclusivity, or your membership into certain groups, and most of those groups were fueled by religion. So these different political movements and these different groups were like things like temperance. So we just got done talking about prohibition and how the temperance movement relates into that. That's when this is going to start happening. Abolition, so the abolishment of slavery, are also going to be things that are going to pop up in the Second Great Awakening. We also get basically new religions popping up as the country starts to expand after the Louisiana Purchase. So this is where we get Mormons and different other groups like Quakers that are going to continue to grow, okay? And now again, we kind of find ourselves in another 100 years in the 1920s, going through a new wave of religious awakening, or kind of these new wave called fundamentalism. Okay? We don't get to call this one the Third Great Awakening. We got a better namer after the second one, but we call this wave fundamentalism. This wave is going to specifically hit the southern portion of the United States. But fundamentalism is where we're going. every once in a while. Like right now, I can hear Mrs. Harms talking, and I think like, man, am I that loud too? That I can hear. You guys can hear me on the other hill? I probably am. I'm so much louder than her.
Nah.
A little bit sometimes. I get on tangents sometimes. I get loud. Oh yeah.
You hear you when you're talking to your
Yeah. I get passionate sometimes. I'm loud.
But that's better. That actually gets you
I know my videos are sometimes loud, but I think Mr. Bennett's the worst.
Oh yeah.
He puts it on full blast like all the time. I can hear it all the way down here.
I can hear him.
That's always what I worry about. I don't really care if like Mrs. Harms class can hear me, but I'm always worried that like Senora is gonna come up here and start yelling at me one day because I'm super loud.
Put your niche or something.
Okay, that's good. That makes me feel better. All right, so our new wave during kind of the early 1900s and into the 1920s of fundamentalism is being countered, like many of these other awakenings. There's different groups that come up against it, right? So in the Second Great Awakening, we have people who are anti-temperance and people who are anti-abolition. In the First Great Awakening, we have people who want to stay with England, right? There's always people who have to fight it, okay? So that's no different with this new wave of fundamentalism. So fundamentalism has a counterpart in the form of modernism and modernists, okay? So this whole, I know this seems like a weird start to a court case, okay, but basically this court case is going to look like fundamentalism versus modernism, okay? So let's just take a look at what both of them stand for, what both of them basically do, or their belief system, okay? Fundamentalists were people who emphasized Protestant teachings and teaching the truth of the Bible. So fundamentalism is a religious awakening or is a religious movement, and they're focusing mostly on Protestant teachings. Protestant is a sect of Christianity that most of the time talks about literal truths of the Bible, that things that happen in the Bible or the prophecies in the Bible are true and literal and should be taken as such, okay? Obviously things change over time and like religion's pretty fluid in general, so it's not like every Protestant you will ever meet believes these things, but fundamentalism specifically kind of bases on that, okay? So literal interpretations of the Bible. The demographic of a fundamentalist tended to be somebody who lived in rural areas, so not necessarily a city slicker, but somebody who lived in rural areas. And especially in the 1920s, as this kind of economic booming decade with lots of consumer culture, which we'll talk about later in this unit, there's a lot of different opportunities to basically buy and sell and be a part of this, quote, consumer culture. Fundamentalists tend to stay out of this consumer culture. There's small participation. So the fact that they are not participating in consumer culture and tend to be rural dwellers, we can make the assumption and we can see that a lot of farmers are fundamentalists. And like I said earlier, fundamentalists are normally located in the southern portion of the United States during this time, but that's mostly because the southern portion of the United States is very religious in general in comparison to the north and the west. So it's just kind of based on statistics, okay? On the other hand, if we have fundamentalists on one side, on the other side, we have modernists. Modernists are people who are kind of jumping into the modern era, who emphasize science over religion. With industrialization in the latter half of the 1800s and going into the 1900s, we have so many new technological and scientific advancement even after World War I as well. So we have this group of modernists that are coming out basically saying that science should be preferred over religion. Yes, Ryan? Industrial Revolution is generally accepted as between 1880 and 1900. But technology will always continue to boom from there. Yep. So, and then like I said, after World War I, we got all that new technology because of war. We also get a bunch of new science to help treat people better from injuries of war. So these modernists, on the other hand, are saying that science should be taken as the truth instead of religion. They generally showed openness towards societal change. They, again, demographics generally tended to be urban dwellers, so city slickers, people who lived in larger cities or places with larger population. Also tended to be non-religious, again, just a small demographic. And the most important part of this is that modernists always valued education over religion. That kind of goes hand in hand with the science over religion thing, but education over religion. That you have a duty to be, or to have information presented in front of you and be able to make your own decision, basically. Okay? So, like I said, this may be an interesting start or kind of an odd start. You're like, what the hell does fundamentalism and modernism have to do with a court case? Okay. But as you'll see as we are reading through this court case or when we're watching about it, it's basically a battle between the fundamentalists of the United States and the modernists of the United States. I promised you only 2 slides, so you can go ahead and put your notes away. I keep with my word. Yeah. I have a very short video to show you kind of more background about the specifics of the details of the Scopes monkey trial before we get into our assignments. So while this video is playing, it's only a couple minutes long, but while it's playing, we just need to make sure that we're being good listeners. I wouldn't quite put writing utensils away quite yet because we're going to need it for our assignment, but I just want to make sure. Okay. So, all right, again, just a very short video. It's going to talk about basically how the 1920s look and then a little bit of background information about this Scopes monkey trial. Come on.
The 1920s seemed both highly conservative and radically moderate. There were conservative presidents like Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, and conservative social measures like prohibition. In the 1920s, the KKK emerged as a major political and commercial force, gaining control of several state legislatures. The media celebrated a less conservative side as well. Gangsters, jazz-age flappers, and a Hollywood movie culture that seemed both glamorous and dangerously immoral. The theory of evolution brought the conflict between tradition and modernity to a focus. In 1925, Tennessee passed a law restricting the teaching of evolution in public schools. The American Civil Liberties Union regarded such laws as unconstitutional infringements of free speech, and it had publicly offered to defend anyone who willingly broke the Tennessee law. John Thomas Scopes was a football coach and a math teacher who sometimes taught biology in a small East Tennessee town. One day, a group of local businessmen approached him about making a test case. They reviewed a textbook then in use in the Dayton schools, which taught evolution in a way that violated the Tennessee law. Scopes agreed, and the trial became a national obsession. The first, but not the last, trial of the century. It brought together two of the most famous figures in American politics and law, William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. Darrow stood, in a general way, for modernity and skepticism. He defended Scopes. Bryan stood, in a general way, for tradition and faith. He defended Tennessee's law. The two men's presence at the trial helped set off a media circus. It drew the attention of newspapers, magazines, ministers, politicians, philosophers, radio broadcasters, and average citizens. Your task is to figure out how the Scopes trial is more than a simple debate between evolutionists and creationists.
All right. So, like this is kind of telling you, was the Scopes trial about more than just creation versus evolution? Or was there something more to it? And what is the impact that this trial is going to have on basically the rest of history? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand out your packets that you guys are going to be operating with. Before you get started, we are going to do a little bit of stuff together. So just kind of write your name on it, get situated. All right. So, I think I can. All right, so to start off with this, or what I would like you to do together, so one of the things that we're going to be talking about, or one of the things we're going to be trying to answer, is basically how has this battle, or how does this battle of evolution versus modernity, or evolution versus creation, that's the proper way to put it, evolution versus creation, going to play out in this specific case. So we've got this guy who is a science teacher at a Tennessee high school who is teaching evolution, basically the process that humans evolved over time. And Tennessee says, no, you're not supposed to be doing that. And they go to court over it, okay? Throughout this packet, and what we're going to do throughout this is they're going to see different documents or different primary sources, basically on one side or the other, being creation versus evolution, okay? And then on the back side, you'll kind of bring it all together. But to at least get us started today, I want us to just take a little bit of time and read through this first page here that says Acidic Biology, the textbook section, okay? So in 1925, Tennessee passed the following law called the Butler Act. So this is a snippet from that law, the Butler Act. It shall be unlawful for any teacher to teach any theory that denies the story of divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. So that's a snippet from the Butler Act. That is a law in Tennessee that's passed in the 1925, okay? The Butler Act made it illegal to teach from textbooks like the one below. And then it's got a little bit of a snippet from the textbook that they mentioned in the video, okay? I would like you to take just a couple of minutes, to start on this, read through the snippet of this textbook, and then answer those two questions at the bottom. You don't have to move on quite yet from after that. Just read the excerpt and answer the questions. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time and then we'll talk about it together, okay?